G'day, I'm Pete, the Aussie Bush Cop. In 2012 I retired from the New South Wales Police and moved to King Island and become a homesteader. And I'd like to share some of my stories with you. So come in the barn and I'll share them with you. G'day everybody, thanks for joining me again. The story that I have for you today is just one story, and I'm going to share with you about my transfer from Dubbo Police Station to my first one-man station, which was called Greenthorpe, spelled Greenethorpe. I'd been at Dubbo at this stage for 6 years and 8 months, and the tenure, every police station in New South Wales has a tenure, and the tenure of Dubbo was 3 years. So I'd certainly been past how long I had to be there. And it was a pretty tough grind. Dubbo was a police station in those days of around somewhere between 40 and 50 general duties police. It's a pretty big show, 24-hour station. It had the full contingent of radio technicians were there, the crime scene unit was there, the detectives were there was a highway patrol unit, there was other squads of plainclothes police, and it was a pretty big show, a very, very busy police station. Reportedly in its day, routinely the third busiest police station in New South Wales with regard to arrest rate. And oftentimes my arrest rate was either the highest or very near the highest. And I was clearly looking for a break. By that stage in my career, I had decided against promotion. On 2 occasions I'd been approached by inspectors who drew me aside and gave me that talk about being promoted to sergeant and then to inspector. And probably, I think to their dismay, I declined that invitation. I decided on another course, and that was to go to one-man stations. The beauty of the rank of senior constable is that there's a job in every police station in the state needs senior constables, and so that's what the rank that I was at, and I decided that I wanted to go to and just be away at a one-man station, at least one. So I put in for one job at another station, didn't get it, and then I was successful in getting the job at Greenthorpe, to some degree to the thanks of one of my colleagues, a bloke named Scott Barton, who was still a serving member and went on to become a detective in the stock squad. And Scott had got the job at a nearby station called Kurawatha. So when I transferred down to Greenthorpe, well, before I took the job, my wife and I drove down there to look at the station and the house, because of course the job came with its own house under the same roof as the station. And Sharon and I drove down there, and we were met by one of the other police in that sector who opened up the house and the station for me and Sharon to look at. I can remember spreading out my arms across the counter of the Greenthorpe police station. Now, my reach going that way is about 6 feet, and I could reach either end of the counter, which really quite thrilled me. And Greenthorpe was a quaint little village of 120 people. It was very much an English style of village, and there was a reason for that, and we'll come to that in a minute. 12 kilometres up the road, that I was yet to find out, was a huge old castle called Iandra Castle. And Greenthorpe come from the fellow that built the castle. His name was George Henry Green, and he built that village for the workers who were going to work on his farm. And Thorpe, Thorpe, is an old English word for village. So Greenthorpe literally meant Green's village. And in its day, Iandra Castle and the property on which it stood was the biggest wheat farm in the world. It was 36,000 acres with wheat growing on it. But anyway, at that point, I didn't know anything about Iandra Castle. So Sharon and I checked out the house and the station and were quite happy with it. And we then drove from Greenthorpe towards Young, which is going another direction that we went that was different to how we got there. So we're, as I said, about 12 kilometres out of Greenthorpe. I started to see on my right the vaunted rooftop of Iandra Castle. And the more we drove and the more this mansion seemed to sort of arise out of the countryside, out of the hills and the gullies. And I become captivated by it. And I then drove I saw a gate into a farmhouse, and I drove in there because I wanted to find out more about this magnificent building that we just seen. And the people that managed the farm were actually away on holidays. And I met the people that managed the farm to this day is still Rod and Beverly Kershaw. And I drove in there and met I believe it was Rod's parents who were looking after the place. And from that point on, we then drove into Young and had a look around Young. What I then did was after I took up duty there, I then went up and found out more about this castle, this old building. And I found out that it was owned by Mrs. Margaret Morris, and she used to open it about 6 or 8 times a year to the public, and that happens to this day. I then became friends with Mrs. Morris, and then as much as I could, I would attend the open days and I would just help out with the parking. And on average, probably around 300 people would attend each open day. And I would just help out with the parking. And it was just a lot of fun. There was a fellow named Adrian Capra who had a coffee van and he made the most excellent coffee. And we would just have fun being together and helping people, showing people where to park. And as the years went on, I was at Greenthorpe for about 3 years and 8 months, I think it was. And I became quite fond of Margaret. And Margaret was quite an elderly woman. And by the time I'd come on the scene, her husband had already passed on, so I never had the pleasure of meeting him. The time came for me to move on from Greenthorpe and to take up another position at Manildra. And Margaret Morris was quite a stoic woman, quite firm, very level-headed, clearly a very successful businesswoman, because her and her husband, when they bought Iandra Castle, the house was a wreck. I never saw it like that, of course, but the front door of the castle was a piece of corrugated iron. For years and years and years, it had been used as a boys' home for wayward boys, and it had gone under quite a bit of degradation. Lead lighting had been smashed. There was and it took a man 12 years to restore the lead lighting to its current glory. And I harboured a desire to spend a night there, but I always considered that to be perhaps like I was using my position as the local policeman to an incorrect way. But I thought, if I don't ask, all they can say is no. And so one of these open days, the last open day that was going to be before I took up my transfer to the next station, Margaret was there, and I might say the courage to ask Margaret if I could stay there one night. Because I just love old things. I love anything that's old, and especially buildings. And I said to Margaret, would I be able to stay here one night? And she said, of course you can, Peter. And she took me by the hand, we were outside. She took me by the hand and said, let's go and pick a room for you. She said, have the run of the house. And then she took me by the hand and took me into the building. And I urge any of you watching this to Google Iandra Castle and see the building that I'm talking about. Magnificent building. And I was very familiar with the building, been in it many times. and it has around 16 bedrooms. And I decided I'm going to take the biggest and flashiest bedroom that's there. And I later stepped it out, and I measured it to be around 9 metres by 9 metres, with a big, beautiful bed, and then there was an ensuite. And LED lighting galore, LED lighting above the door into the room, LED lighting above the window that was behind the bed. And anyway, that's the room that I picked. And so I think that very night I asked my wife if she wanted to stay with me, and she gave me a very firm no. Because I need to perhaps explain, before you go and look at Iandra Castle on the net, it is a creepy looking building. If you've ever seen the show, the original TV show, The Addams Family, well, Iandra Castle is akin to that. And so that's why my wife declined the opportunity to stay there. I'm going to read to you a little bit about what it was like to stay there that night. Then I'll tell you and then I'll tell you a little bit more what happened. As I lay in bed reading, my eyes kept straying to the LED light windows in my room that allowed the moon's glow in. I had accustomed my eyes to the nocturnal sounds of the mansion, just as it is with any home after dark. When everyone is in bed asleep, the castle has its own noises. The mansion echoed with blasts of wind that eddied in the verandas, while some of it made its way down the corridors and made vague slapping sounds. It was as if the home was breathing and winding down from having so many visitors through the day. Her breathing was sleeping away any traces of modernity visitors may have left. The other thing that I'll say is that Margaret was regaling me with stories of what she believed to be a ghost that inhabited the building. And she said that the ghost was a former head servant, because in its day when it was built, there were servants there. That's why there were so many bedrooms. And I'm pretty level-headed, and I certainly don't believe in ghosts, but something odd happened through the night. I fell asleep. Before I went up to my room for the night, I went down into Margaret's library and I selected a book to read, because there was no TV, of course, or understandably there was no TV. And I'd read from this book and then fell asleep. And somewhere during the night, I woke up because it felt like someone sat on my bed. Now, what that was, I truly don't know. Possibly it was a waking dream, I don't know. But I can tell you, it startled me. Now, I'm someone that was well used to being in scary, very dangerous situations as a policeman. But the feeling that I had that someone sat on my bed, I'll tell you, rattled me. Somehow or other, I managed to go back to sleep, and then I woke with the dawn coming through the windows, and I got up and I got dressed and I went and sat down on a bed, on a chair that was at the top of the very grand staircase. And when Beverly was walking up the steps that morning to do some work in the mansion, she didn't see me, and I said good morning to her, and she was a little bit startled too. So I wondered whether she'd had any encounters herself. The other thing that happened was Margaret, as the years rolled on and I transferred to another station, and I become aware that Margaret had fallen quite ill, in fact, gravely ill. And I was really fond of Margaret, and Margaret was a great encouragement to her to actually write books. And she was very encouraging to me. Anyway, I wrote a letter to Margaret. She lived about 2/3 of her life at this other farm that I'd never visited. It was in the Candos-Royalston area. And I got the address and I wrote Margaret a letter expressing my concern and interest in her health and her current plight. It was a heartfelt letter that I wrote to her. And after she passed on, but before she passed on, she rang Rod, who managed the property for her, and she said, and she told Rod about the letter that I'd written, and she was quite moved. And and Rod said she was moved to tears about my letter to her, and she instructed Rod that my letter was to be put into the library of the castle, and put there, forever, I suppose. And for all I know, it's still there. The reason I'm telling you that is not to make myself look good or anything like that, but it shows that even when someone's pretty tough, someone's been around for a long time, they've made a lot of money by being a hard-headed businesswoman, that everyone has a soft side. And I guess if there's any message or encouragement to anybody, is to be unfailingly kind to people, because everyone's doing it tough. I won't finish the story there on that sombre note, although I don't think anything wrong with finishing things on a sombre note. But there's a funny little story to it. After I transferred to Manildra, and I still kept on in very close contact with Iandra and the open days, and when I had rest days that allowed me to go down for the open days, I still used to do that. On one of those occasions, I went down there, and there was a barbecue after the open day, and I was planning on going down into the village of Greenthorpe to visit friends down there after the barbecue, and then coming back to the castle and staying the night in the castle. Now, there was two blokes there. One of them was Rod, and another fellow that was a friend of Rod's was there, and instinct told me they were up to some mischief. And I looked at these two fellows, and one of these fellows had his son, who was quite young at the time, there. And I looked at I had my overnight bag there, and I pointed to my overnight bag, and I said to these two blokes, said, "See that bag over there?" Said, "My pistol, my Glock, is in that overnight bag. Anything happens tonight, I'm just as likely to rattle off a couple of shots," which I didn't have my pistol with me, but they didn't know that. And what they had planned, I found this out maybe years later. I found out when that young boy got older, and he said, "Pete," he said, "you remember that night?" I said, "Yeah, I remember that night." He said they were planning, one of them was going to hide in the wardrobe, and one of them was going to hide under your bed, and simultaneously one was going to drop their hand on my chest. Sorry for the microphone. Drop their hand on my chest, and the other one was going to burst out of the wardrobe and scare the wits out of me. He said, "Well," he said, "we don't know." He said he could have his pistol in that bag and rattle off a couple of shots, and for that reason alone they chose not to do it. So I'm glad I said it, because I might have embarrassed myself. Anyway, thanks for watching this story. I look forward to your comments, and we'll see you next time.